Hi, everyone. Welcome to Virtual Coffee Talks. I'm your host, Christine Chang, and I'm so pleased to welcome Erin to my podcast today to be the guest host. Before we kick things off, Erin, would you like to introduce yourself a little bit?
Sure. My name is Erin Hobey of EKMH Innovators, and I focus on content creation, editing, and ghostwriting for the global tech and fintech clients. And I'm thrilled to be here. One of my interviewees was Christine Chang about a year ago, and you can click through and see her interview. But I'm honored to be here as a guest host today.
Thanks, Erin. And just for context, so as Erin mentioned, we met when she interviewed me about a year ago, which I really loved the interview because we talked a lot about leadership, diversity, and inclusion, which are topics that are very near and dear to me that I really enjoy. And then since then, I've enjoyed seeing the different pieces that you've done with people who, are very diverse, and the people that you interview are also very inclusive. And I really like the human nature side of the human interest side of your work. So I wanted to invite you to come and help me with this season finale of Virtual Coffee Talks, and also because you helped me get it started, because I reached out sort of blindly at the beginning and said, from a sort of journalistic expert perspective, what do you think about this podcast? So thank you, Erin, for being willing to host this episode of this podcast. Over to you.
It's a pleasure. Okay, so a quick intro. Who are you, Christine? Tell us a little bit.
Sure. I'll give the elevator pitch or elevator speech. Great. I'm Christine Chang. I'm originally from the States, as you can probably tell from my accent. I've been living in Mexico for the last 5 years, and I'm very involved in the startup ecosystem, which I'm very passionate about.
Okay, so we'll start with one of my favorite parts of your podcast, Rapid Fire.
Okay.
So where are you from in the US? And where are you now?
Yep. So originally from a not so small town, I guess, Arlington, Texas, which is just outside of Dallas. And actually right now I am in Bedford, Texas. Came up to stay with family and work remotely from here during the lockdown. But typically I can be found in La Roma Norte in Mexico City.
Great. And are you a beach or mountain person?
Definitely a beach person. And the reason I put this question in is because one time I think I ended up at a sales pitch for a timeshare, and they asked if I was a beach or mountain person. And I thought, is that even a question? I would choose beach any day, every day. And then since then, I've discovered that there are people who would choose mountain any day, every day.
It's true. It's true.
So I'm definitely a beach person.
Me too. Where will your next vacation be? If you don't have to quarantine.
If I didn't have to quarantine, hopefully on a beach. The last vacation that I took was a quick trip to Pia de la Cuesta, which is just north of Acapulco. And it was nice because it was very quiet and I was able to socially distance very easily. And it's a really beautiful place.
Great. And on your next vacation, would you go bungee jumping or would you go skydiving?
I might try skydiving. I still have to work up a lot of courage to do that. But again, this question I put in because I think it's also a duality, and it's really interesting to see that people are very much in one camp or the other. Right. Bungee jumping, I think it would be hard for me to sort of be on solid ground or bridge, something solid, and then just jump into nothing. And I guess skydiving is sort of the same, but I think from a plane, you have a different perspective where you really don't know how far the ground is, etc. So in theory, I would do skydiving, but so far I've done neither.
Okay. And which books would you recommend and why?
I love reading and I love sharing what I read. I talk about Brené Brown books all the time, and any of those books I think are super enlightening, both at a personal development level as well as leadership. So I can't not recommend that. She also has a podcast. It's called Unlocking Us, which I think is really relevant for these times as well, because she talks about courage and vulnerability and all the different things that we're always grappling with how do I recognize that I'm coming from fear, and then how do I turn that around to overcome it? And I also recently read The Game of Life and How to Play It, which is by Florence. I think her name is Florence Scovel. No, Florence. I'll put it in the call notes.
Okay.
She has a double barrel last name, but the book is called The Game of Life and How to Play It, and it's a little woo woo. It's from many years ago, so it's sort of interesting to see that the times that she lived in, there are a lot of human elements that continue to be the same. So, for example, she talks about being careful with our words, which I think also there's that quote to say, watch your thoughts because they become your words, and your words become your actions. And I think in the political environment that we're living in currently, with just before the U.S. elections too, and just the last several years, watching our words is something that can create a lot of harm or create a lot of benefit. So she says that, for example, we often just have these very casual sayings to say, oh, I'm exhausted. So even small things like that kind of add up, and then you do start to feel that way. Or if you can turn it around and say, this is good because, even if it's a very, very dire situation or something that you feel is very challenging, to try to look at it always from a different perspective, and then slowly that sort of starts to become true. So it's an interesting thought experiment. And then in terms of work-related books, I highly recommend The Secrets of Sandhill Road by Scott Kupor. He's one of the partners at Andreessen Horowitz. And it's a good sort of insider view of Silicon Valley and VC and how it actually all works. Everything from, who are the limited partners, or who are the people who invest in the VCs, and then how are VCs sort of structured, and what are their objectives and everything like that, and how does that then translate into what typically startups and the public sees of VCs. So it kind of puts everything into context, and it's a really good book.
Okay, and what is one of your productivity hacks? It must be kind of funny answering the questions that you always ask other people. But so, in your experience, what's your productivity hack or hacks?
I have a lot. I think I'm kind of obsessed with productivity. It's always interesting to me to see how to do something better, faster, more effectively. One that I would recommend is in Google Calendars, there's a setting that you can put short meetings. And so instead of, if you try to create a 30-minute meeting, it'll automatically put it as 25 minutes. And then if you create an hour-long meeting, it'll set it to 50 minutes. And what that does is, if you actually do follow your agenda and the timing of the meetings and respect the time that you set for meetings, which I'm very, very much a stickler on, that gives you, for example, 5 minutes after the 25-minute meeting to go ahead and send the agenda or send the minutes, or to take action about what you and I just talked about, right? Because what sometimes happens is you have a full day of meetings, and then you end up at the end of the day tired and with a long list of to-dos and follow-ups. So with that 5 minutes after a 25-minute meeting, or those 10 minutes after a 50-minute meeting, you can sort of finish up all the open items from that meeting, and or prepare for the next meeting, and or take a quick break. So that's one of the productivity hacks that I really like.
That's a good one. I'll have to check that out. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so if you just go into settings in Google Calendars, there's just check short meetings. Yep.
Great. And mentee or mentor?
Both.
Or both.
Both. I'm a huge fan of mentorship, and I think that not enough people reach out and ask for that. And in my career, I've had the good fortune of having great mentors, but a lot of times that was because I literally asked, will you be my mentor? And that just kind of is a, how do you say in Spanish, compromiso, like a commitment, a commitment between you and that person to say, we're here for each other, and let's have a regular conversation. And I think in any mentorship, it's both ways, right? As a mentor and a mentee, you both gain from that relationship.
I agree. And something you do for the sheer fun of it.
I'm not embarrassed to admit, I am a fan of country music, and something where I can get totally lost in terms of what time it is, etc., is listening to country music and cooking.
Okay. What are you cooking, and which songwriters do you listen to?
I love Kenny Chesney. I know it should be embarrassing, but it's not. I love Kenny Chesney. I had a huge phase where I was listening to Shania Twain when I was in high school. I like not all country artists, but I have a long list. And cooking, I like to bake, although I bake gluten-free. So
Great. And something most people get wrong about you.
a lot of things, like you wouldn't think that I like country music, but I do. Yeah. And also, I think that a lot of people, something that I kind of have to be conscious of is I think a lot of people try to read into what I'm saying. And I think I'm quite literal and quite direct. So what I'm saying is literally exactly what I mean, no more, no less. And that's something that I have become aware of, especially being an American in a different context, living in Latin America. Sometimes I have to over-explain, normally I would just say one sentence, but so that people don't read too much into it, I have to sort of tell them what I'm not saying and then go back to what I am saying.
Interesting. Something that everyone should do or try once in her life.
Create something from scratch, whether it could be just a recipe, sort of just thinking, okay, I want to bake a cake. How would I do it without a recipe? Or for example, me creating this podcast was a little bit around that as well, just to say, I created this. I just decided to do it.
That's exciting. Okay, now the interview questions. So discuss your career trajectory and then your new role at IGNIA. Congratulations.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, so I should have mentioned at the top of the episode that I've recently joined the team at IGNIA, which is a Mexico-based VC, a venture capital firm, which is focused on B2C, business to consumer type of startups that provide better access to better goods and services for the emerging middle class. And a little bit around my career trajectory and how I ended up here. I'll try to give the shorter version. So I studied international business in college. Didn't exactly know what I wanted to do with that, but just something international, something that would allow me to travel and see the world. And I just thought it was practical to study business. And after graduating from Pepperdine University, I ended up coming back to Dallas. And my first role was in inside sales with American Airlines, which is ironic because when I graduated, I said, I don't know what I want to do yet, but I know I don't want to do sales. So of course, as life would have it, as I said, be careful with your words because you attract what you're talking about, whether it's in the negative or positive. So I ended up in inside sales at American Airlines. From there, I moved into global sales where I was managing top accounts from Fortune 500 companies, for example, Microsoft, Time Warner, UBS. And from there, UBS, my client, hired me to go work for them in New York. The airlines hired me back 4 years later to work on a project between American Airlines, British Airways, and Iberia. Hi, Kitty.
She always comes and calls. I've even closed the door. I'm sorry. Anyway.
No worries.
So Iberia.
I'm sure that my two dogs will come in at some point. So I was working on a joint business between American Airlines, British Airways, and Iberia. That then sort of put IE Business School on my radar. And I decided after we finished that project to study my MBA at IE Business School, which is based in Madrid. And I had been going to Madrid quite a bit for the project. While I was doing my MBA, I did a social impact fellowship in Peru. And that's what opened my eyes to everything that is Latin America. There's so much opportunity. There are people who are always looking for new opportunities to create something And I say this at every socioeconomic level, right? So I really like the energy and the desire to, I guess it would be sort of entrepreneurial mindset that people have in Latin America to say, okay, well, I'm not waiting for the government to help me out here. They may or they may not. But you know, if I want to make more money, or if I want to send my kids to school, or whatever it may be, excuse me, they kind of just go after that opportunity. So my hypothesis in coming to Latin America was perhaps I could apply my corporate experience in a way that had more of a direct impact on a day-to-day basis. So in 2015, when I graduated from IE, I moved to Mexico, and over the last several years have had different roles. So I've worked with startups. I worked back on the corporate side again with Deloitte in Mexico. I worked at Rappi, which is one of the Colombian unicorns. Yeah. And then I was at Finovista / Startup Bootcamp, which you are familiar with, which is an organization that looks to boost transform financial services in Latin America through fintech. And most recently, as I mentioned, I joined Ignia as industry and investor relations.
And why VC? Why make the shift from sales at the beginning to VC?
So actually,
and fintech.
VC has a lot to do with sales, right? Because you have to raise a fund, and in order to raise a fund, you're basically asking people for money. So that's a big sell. That's a big sale, because you are selling them your vision for the future. You're selling them your investment thesis, and they're making a bet on you as a team. So it's actually a really complex sale. And how I ended up in VC is, so when I started at Finovista Startup Bootcamp, and part of the interview process, just for lack of awareness in that sector, because I'd never run an accelerator or an incubator before, my conversation was around what are the typical career paths after being a program director for a program like Startup Bootcamp. And because we worked with investors, startups, and corporates, you know, what we talked about was that you could end up at a VC, you could end up at a startup, at a corporate. And over the two and a bit more years that I was there, VC became something that I was more and more interested in, because you're on the one hand helping startups because you're investing in them, but really what startups need is what we refer to as smart money, right? So it's not just the dollars that you're investing, it's also how are you going to be able to help advise that startup and help coach them and be there side by side to help them grow, so they keep reaching new levels. And also I realized that in VC, there's a lot of deal making, right? So obviously you have to find a deal that works between your VC and the startup, and then also how you structure your fund and everything like that. That's, I guess, what you would categorize as deal making. And I really enjoy deal making, and that actually has to do with the experience that I've had in sales and being able to work in the past with large multinational companies and working on complex sales. So I find that it's kind of a blend of all the different things that I've been working on. And the most important of all is being there with the startups and helping them grow.
Great. So tell us more about Virtual Coffee Talk. Why did you decide to initiate the podcast? And what have you learned from the first episode to now the 21st?
Yes, I can't believe it. So Virtual Coffee Talks, the idea came at some point when I was working in Startup Bootcamp, because with that program, what I really enjoyed was we brought in a lot of mentors on different topics from different backgrounds. And I was always fascinated by the conversations that we would be having in that room between the startup and the expert, the mentor, et cetera. And I thought, wow, I think a lot of people can really benefit from these conversations. And sometimes they were really technical conversations to build on somebody's expertise, maybe about growth marketing. And then sometimes it was more a founder's journey. So we would invite an entrepreneur that maybe was a little bit further ahead than our entrepreneurs, and they would share their story about why they created their company, what motivates them, why they get up every morning with this passion to do what they do. And so I had this thought that it would be really incredible to share that with more people. And as I was preparing to finish out my tenure at Startup Bootcamp, this was in May, I thought, well, this would be a good time to sort of start new projects. And as I mentioned, thank you, Erin, because I reached out to you then and I said, what do you think about a podcast that, you know, would showcase the talent that we have here in Latin America, and also just give people insights to, look, these people work in the ecosystem as a startup founder, as a VC, as a corporate who works with startups, and they're people. You know, you can approach them and they're people first, and then their job secondly. And you were very, very encouraging with that. So I thank you for helping give me that nudge to get started. And the other thing too was that I had been working with so many startups, and I have a tremendous respect for people who will just take that huge leap and dedicate their life to solving a problem that they think that needs to be solved. And I thought, well, I want to be able to walk the walk as well as talk the talk, right? So I'm coaching these people who are willing to be brave enough to create something. So I should at least create something as well, even if it's just a podcast. So that's a little bit about how I got started with virtual coffee talks. What I've learned from the first episode to now. Of course, there are a lot of technical things that I've learned, just sort of tips and tricks in terms of, you know, how to record it, how to edit it, all the different things to make it more appealing to the audience. Although I do admit that I've purposely kept it very low production and no bells and whistles, which has worked well for me. Yeah. And I've also learned a lot about the people who I interviewed. And I've really, really enjoyed that. And I tried to create a diversity of voices between startups, corporate profiles, and VCs, and also to kind of bring out who the person is. And I think it's really interesting to learn that at the end of the day, we're all similar, right? So we have our triumphs, but we also have these huge failures, and the key is to be able to pick yourself up and keep going. So that's also something I've learned from the sort of human side, is that we all go through the same challenges.
In all the podcasts, you really have a knack for bringing out, you know, people's experiences and having them speak candidly, as if it's just one-on-one and no one else is listening to people talk about their failures or experiences. Well, so will you talk about one or two of your failures where, you know, even when you think of the word failure, like one specific experience comes to mind?
I have a lot.
Or a series of experiences.
A series of experiences. I think in my transition to Latin America, there were so many failures. And I think a lot of it had to do with adaptation. And I think what changed, so at the beginning, probably the first year that I was living in Mexico, I would generally say that I felt frustrated. I would generally say that I asked a lot of, why me? You know, why is this happening to me? Which is kind of the wrong question to be asking, because it's life. And as we see now in the US, you could say, why is this happening? Right? With the current administration, why is this happening? And I think the lesson there is more to look for what the situation is teaching you, or maybe what are some small signals that, you know, can guide you towards a certain path or away from another one, right? And I think sometimes when we experience bumps in the road and challenges, it's more an indication that maybe that's not the right path right now. And then on the contrary, when you feel that things kind of just flow, that's the natural momentum and I think validation that you're moving in the right direction. But I guess to sort of bring it to one specific failure story is, I can share, because now I can look back on it and laugh. At the moment, I couldn't really, but as I mentioned, I did a social impact fellowship in Peru while I was doing my MBA. And I was working with a family office in Peru in a very nice part of Lima, while my colleagues from my MBA were working with the Red Cross. They were working on waterless toilets. They were working on, bringing potable water to the small villages outside of Lima. They were working on things that felt very, very tangible in terms of this is creating an impact. And I was working with this family office to create a sustainable finance division or business line. So taking their existing client base and helping them to find a way of creating revenue that would be what you call triple bottom line. So not only creating a sort of revenue impact, but also being aware of the social and environmental aspects of that, which I feel like is much more mainstream these days. But back then it was a little bit new. So I kept getting frustrated because I thought, I'm going to work every day in this really nice office in a really nice part of Lima. And it doesn't feel like I'm really creating a lot of impact for people. I don't really see how this is creating a positive impact, a social impact. And the team who put this program together kept saying, you have to sort of take off your hat or your lens from the US to say, you have to be out there working with the Red Cross in order to have an impact. Here in Latin America, there are many, many ways to create impact. And it doesn't always have to be, donating money to an NGO or working with the Red Cross or anything like that. Here you're working on projects where you're creating, where you're creating, I can see the cat's tail, where you're creating sort of new revenue opportunities for these companies that may work with smallholder farmers, or you're creating a market in China or Singapore that this company can now export globally, have more access to other markets, and in turn that helps their supply chain, whether it's their employees because the company is growing and maybe they can get a pay raise, or maybe that allows them to work on other projects. Even if it's building a mall in a village, that mall is going to create jobs, formal jobs in the formal sector, in the formal economy, and that's also creating impact. So I think my failure was the struggle that I was always saying. I'm really frustrated because I don't feel like I'm making an impact. And then now, having lived in Latin America for the last 5 years, it's just funny to me because it is true. In markets like Latin America, there is an opportunity to create impact in many, many different ways, shapes, and forms. So it's kind of ironic to me that I struggled so much against that at the beginning. So it was a failure on my part to sort of just be and enjoy the process of that project.
Right.
And the lesson was what is most exciting to me and what I'm most passionate about working in Latin America, that ability to create impact, even though you're working in the for-profit sector, even if you're working in finance or something that, you're not out in the trenches, putting waterless toilets in the fields, you're still creating an impact.
Absolutely. I mean, that's something you could do on the weekend.
Exactly.
So tell me about Mujeres de Fintech and how, and the ecosystem, and I guess how it's benefited you and how I guess your impact as well.
Sure.
And being
so Mujeres en Fintech, it's a WhatsApp group that was created by Hannah Schuma and some other women in the ecosystem, Jackie Highland. They just decided, let's create a network where women who are working in fintech in Latin America can be connected. Just started as simple as that. And I really like that approach because I think a lot of times we try to do diversity and inclusion with capital D, capital I, top down, and let's think about all the different things that we can do. And then you have to go and get resources, et cetera, et cetera. And I really like their approach to it, which was simply, let's connect on WhatsApp. And from there, it's been very organic because everybody keeps adding other women that they meet who are in fintech. So it creates visibility that we're actually a lot of women who work in fintech. And I think a lot of times when you're seeing webinars or seeing a panel or something like that, it's not necessarily representative of everybody who works in fintech. I think a lot of the same people get invited, which are the founders and which are the investors, which you know, sort of the way the system is currently, which is changing, is it tends to be much more male dominated. But just the Women in Fintech group allows you to see that there are tons of women working in fintech. We all have very different roles. And it also creates a great network for opportunities, for business development opportunities, for talent opportunities. We're always sharing, hey, so-and-so is looking for a marketing intern, or hey, so-and-so needs a contact at such and such bank. And it's a great network, and everybody is really, really willing to help. And from there too, there are just tons of interesting conversations because, you know, women and men are different, and there are different work styles. There are different challenges that we face. You know, how do you balance your family and your work? And so those are just conversations that can be had in this environment of, I don't know if you would call it a safe place, but it feels very much like a safe place to just raise your hand and say, hey, I'd like to learn more about crypto. Who can help me out? Hey, I'd like to learn more about angel investing. Who can help me out? What do you recommend? So it's really a great network to have, and something that I think also brings visibility to the ecosystem externally, right? To say there are groups, and there are a lot of women who work in fintech.
So for listeners, how could they join that group?
Get in contact with me, or I'm on Twitter, on LinkedIn, etc., or contact Jackie Highland, Hannah Shuma, or if you can think of anybody you know who's a female in fintech in Latin America, you know, maybe they're already in the group. But yeah, we absolutely welcome all women who work in fintech to get in touch with us and join the group.
And you talked a little bit about diversity and inclusion. And how is the discussion different in Latin America, in your experience, as opposed to the US?
It's a very interesting question. I think diversity and inclusion in Latin America at the present time focuses a lot on gender diversity. And that's for many reasons. I think the ecosystems are very different. The mindset, the culture is quite different. And it's good to start somewhere, right? Before trying to boil the ocean or trying to incorporate all types of diversity, let's just start with something really simple. And for example, in the last episode of this podcast with my tocaya, Christine Kenna, she sits on the gender diversity committee for the Mexican Association of Private Capital. And they recently came out with the first ever report on diversity in the private capital industry in Mexico. And surprisingly or not, 90% of decision makers in the industry, in private equity, in venture capital in Mexico, over 90% of the decision makers are men.
Oh, wow.
So that seems like something worth looking into and to start somewhere. And hopefully in the course of doing that, there naturally comes more diversity in terms of where people went to school, what socioeconomic background they come from. I do think that we need to be having also more conversations around the diversity of thought, which I think we covered in the interview that you and I did about a year ago. So to me, diversity is around diversity of thought. So, you know, setting aside sort of our outward appearances, whether I'm a man, whether I'm a woman, whether I'm, you know, maybe non-binary, or whatever religion, ethnicity, you know, the point is to have people at the table who have different opinions, because that's how you end up getting more high fidelity decisions and running better companies. And what I hear a lot in Latin America is also because, you know, let's say private education and public education, there's a big divide. And there's huge gaps in income equality. And so it's easier to sort of say, I'm going to look for somebody who studied at the same university as I did. I'm going to look for candidates from the top universities because it's more likely that they will have a good level of English, that they will have a pedigree, something like that. And I would encourage I would encourage people to, if that works for you, okay, you can continue doing that. And also find another candidate who has a different background. So I always try to, when I interview people for jobs, I always want to look at ideally three strong candidates, so that I can compare and contrast. So if you're used to recruiting at a certain university and that has worked for you in the past, I'm not going to say, start all over. I think sometimes you have to keep the things that work for you. I would, though, encourage you to also add to that mix people who come from a different university, a different background, because at least you start seeing a different variety of candidates. And I think that being aware and just opening up that filter maybe can take us to a different result.
That's interesting. What's different about the reality of what you do versus what people think you do?
Yeah. So this is an interesting question for me right now, since I'm, I think, 8 or 9 days into my new role at Ignia. But I guess I can answer that from the perspective of what I thought it was going to be and what it's been up till now in the last 8 days. Something that over the last several months, as I've been having a lot of conversations with different people and exploring venture capital and exploring different ways to move more into this sector, a lot of people mentioned the fact that there's a lot to being a VC that is not necessarily seen from the outside, or doesn't necessarily have to do with working with the startups, which is what we all love to do. And I can say that is true. That is definitely true. There's a lot more that happens behind the scenes that goes into running a fund and being a good investor than you typically see from the outside. And I remember Antonia Rojas, who was also on the podcast, I think she was about episode 4 or 5. She had mentioned that to me, and I find that to be true. So I guess that would be my answer to your question. What's different about what I do versus what people think it is? There's a lot of work in running a good fund.
Let me just look down. I did love, you asked Hannah in one of your prior podcasts, how would you explain what you do to your grandmother? I guess in this case, VC, which you talked a little bit about before, or even fintech, how would you describe that to someone in simple terms, but I guess lovingly?
Yes. I really like this question, because when I was working with the startups at Startup Bootcamp, a lot of times things start to get overcomplicated, and you have to be able to explain it in the simplest terms to somebody who absolutely doesn't work or live in this echo chamber, or this sector that we're in. So fintech, I would explain it to my grandmother as using technology to enable financial services for more people. So for example, being able to pay from your cell phone, that's fintech. The technology enables you to make a payment from your cell phone, for you to be able to shop online. Also, at some point, you need to be able to pay for that. So the simplest example that I think everybody can relate to is payments. But then if you want to expand that, then if somebody needs a loan, and maybe they can't get a loan from the bank, so technology enables us to find different lenders. That could be a peer-to-peer lender, or it could be a different type of company, a smaller company who is willing to take on that risk and provide a loan to that person or to that business. And then VC, that's an interesting one. So I guess maybe I would explain that it's investing in these smaller companies, investing in entrepreneurs, investing in companies that are built on technology in order to create better goods and services. So maybe Uber would be a good example, because I think Uber is ubiquitous enough now where even my grandmother would know what Uber is. And so I guess the simplest terms would say VCs are the firms who have the money or raise capital in order to invest in companies like Uber.
Good. What is something you love to see on the other side of the table? For example, when an entrepreneur is pitching you, or when you're looking, to, I guess, add talent to your team.
Yeah. So I guess this can work for both entrepreneurs as well as when I'm interviewing candidates. And especially definitely true in the case of startups. So having the vision, this grand vision of how you're going to change the world, because you have to have that passion and you have to have that mentality of this is something that the world needs and I'm the person to build it, because it's a really tough road. It's really tough being an entrepreneur. So you need to have that passion and drive and the vision of where this is going to take you and where you're going to be in 10 years from now. But coupled with that is the discipline to execute. So here's where I want to get to, and then here's the first step, second step, third step. And you don't have to have everything mapped out, but you see a lot of some people who have this grand vision, but then they don't have the executional ability to start or stick with it. And you have some people who go sort of bottom up, but they're not exactly sure where they're going to end up, which that's hard to invest in. That's hard to sort of jump on the bandwagon in terms of, yeah, let's do this thing, because you don't know where that rocket ship is headed. You need to sort of know my grand plan, my futuristic goal, and how I'm going to change the world is this, even though you're starting small. And I think that is also applicable to talent. So interviewing job candidates is to say, great, if you come on board, what do the first 30, 60, 90 days look like? But also, how does this fit into your overall career trajectory, your path, and where you want to be in 5 or 10 years? Because that helps you not only get to know the person better, but as a manager to understand what are your overall goals and how can I support you in that. So if it's, hey, there's this conference about insurtech, and I know that's not what you're working on right now, but you're interested in it, so come with me to this conference. Or, hey, there's this person who I think could be a great mentor for you because I know you're interested in eventually becoming a VC, and this person has a really interesting path to how they got there. I think having that combination of where you want to get to and then how you're going to start.
That's so empowering. I don't know how you teach people to help people in that way, really bring people under their wings and help them mature in their careers. Yeah.
I think usually it's people who have also had that opportunity where they've had somebody lift them up and they want to pay that forward.
Yeah, it's inspiring. What do you most enjoy in your career?
My career, it's been, I think a lot of people, and especially in VC, say they have had untraditional careers or an untraditional path. And I'm not sure that, I mean, in when I was doing the MBA at IE Business School, the first time I went to career services, my career services person literally told me they didn't know what to do with my CV because it was American Airlines, UBS, and then American Airlines, and it was in different roles. It was in sales, and then it was in operations, and then it was in strategy. And that was before I came to Latin America, and then I worked at Deloitte, at Rappi, at Fino Vista. So I really enjoy the diversity of experiences that I've had because I love being able to nerd out with people of different expertise hats, I guess, to, let's nerd out about operations, let's nerd out about sales, let's nerd out about the airlines. And obviously that's an interesting sector right now with the pandemic and everything that's happened to that sector. But what I most value are the relationships that I've built over the course of my career, and those relationships that are still very strong. And I think that has been something I've really enjoyed through my career, is just the relationships with people of really different backgrounds.
What would be your ultimate nerd out experience?
Oh, so many things. And that's one of the things I really enjoy about VC too, that you get to do that as your job. So you get to nerd out about AI or what's happening in the tech sector, what is happening on the other side of the world. So you get to nerd out about what the future is going to look like, because obviously no one knows. So I really enjoy that. And what else? Contracts is something that I like to nerd out about, and I think most people don't. I'm one of those people who reads everything in the contract, whether it's a cell phone contract or, you know, a contract for a big deal that we're about to sign. I guess that's kind of a weird thing, but I like to nerd out about contracts.
So the next question is advice. I love this question. You've asked your past interviewees about this. So what advice would you give to your younger self of 15 years ago? And then what advice would you give to yourself, you in 15 years? And then what advice would benefit you now in a new role?
Yeah. I think the advice I would give to myself 15 years ago is to relax a bit, chill out, and not everything is around work. I enjoy working. I think I am just one of those people. I like to be productive. I like to work on projects. I like to set goals and achieve them. So I don't think that that is something that I would take away or change, but I think in the journey that I could have relaxed a lot more, enjoyed more the people that were around me. And that's something that I have learned and I really appreciate about Latin America. And part of why I moved to Latin America is that that people really take the time to get to know you. So I lived in New York for many years, and typically, you know, in a social setting, if you meet somebody, it's what do you do? And you could be talking about your careers and your work for 30 minutes at a cocktail party before you even ask, oh, by the way, what's your name? and that's very normal in, at least in New York. And I think most parts of the US, I think that's fairly normal. And in Latin America, it's definitely much more, where are you from? Tell me about your story. Who are you? And then, oh, by the way, what do you do for work? So it's inverted, that conversation. And that's something I really appreciate about Latin America. And my advice to my younger self would be to have more of that lens of understanding the people who are around you and who are they, and learning from their experiences, from their life, rather than only the work side of things. For myself in 15 years, I think that she will be enjoying very much the fruits of her labor right now. I think we're in really interesting times. There was a blog by Mark Andreessen from Andreessen Horowitz about it's time to build. And I think that out of all great crises come amazing things. A lot of the great startups that we know as household names today were born out of the 2008 financial crisis. So much of my professional experience came out of that crisis as well. I was at UBS when that crisis hit, and I fortunately had more work than ever. And I know a lot of people suffered through that financial crisis, especially a lot of people in the banking sector. And for me, because I was on the cost saving side, I actually had more work than ever. So I was fortunate to learn so much in that period of time. And I guess that relates to what advice or what should I be thinking about right now is really just to find ways to build, find ways to participate in, you know, there's this macro environment that is super difficult right now, but how can we find the opportunities to help ourselves, to help other people in the current climate? And then also, how can we find opportunities through the adverse environment right now to create the future? So one example is digital inclusion, or sort of digital activity, digital adoption in Latin America, which is still quite far behind. So prior to the pandemic, you know, in Mexico, pretty much everyone has a smartphone, right? I think the penetration is over 70% of the population in Mexico have a smartphone, But the thing is that people don't necessarily know how to use all the functionalities of a smartphone or apps, etc. And what we've seen across the board is that adoption has gone up tremendously. So a lot of companies talk about they've made progress in the last 6 months. They've had user acquisition or growth numbers that they were expecting to have in a span of 2 years. They've had that in 6 months. And so the thing is how to build on that and how to maintain that so that once we are able to move about more freely and people are able to go back to their day-to-day lives, going to the bank, going to the store, etc. How do we maintain that? How do we make things enable the digital economy? How do we continue to enable it beyond the pandemic? So yeah, thinking about right now is just, I want to make sure that I am taking advantage of all this movement, all this progression, all the things that are being built. I think it's really exciting.
That's exciting. We talked about that. So what do you want to happen in your near future? Either, I guess at work with Latin America in terms of fintech and adaptation of financial technology.
So in the near future, I hope that, so before the pandemic, we were seeing a lot of international investors, investors from Silicon Valley, investors from Europe, from China, showing a lot of interest in Latin America. And in Latin America, the sector that gets the most VC investment is fintech. So that sort of is right up my alley. I hope that comes back. It's gone down a bit due to the pandemic, which is understandable because everybody's sort of focusing closer to home and making sure that, are the companies that I've already invested in, are they doing well? How can I help them, etc. And also there's a huge amount of risk, right? I mean, again, with the US elections and a lot of things being quite uncertain, there's much more risk than for an industry that plays in risk, right? So when we invest in startups, it's obviously a huge risk, and now that's elevated. And what I would love to see in the near future is for that interest to come back. There are so many great startups. There are so many great products and services that are being created, and there's a huge population and total addressable market in Latin America that I think are very interesting for global investors. You can get into a really good deal with really, really good investors that probably aren't as plentiful in the US, because I think in the US it's a very, very, very competitive market for VCs. And in the near future, from the startup side, again, I'm excited to see what's being built right now, and to be able to look back in 2 to 3 years to say, the pandemic was not fun for anyone, and a lot of people have suffered. But the good thing is that these products that provide better access to goods and services for the emerging middle class, they came out of this pandemic. That's what I'm excited about.
Good. So you always end on a shameless plug. So yes, please have a shameless plug. And what would you like to ask from the audience? Because I think in mentor-mentee situations, it's learning how to give and ask. And often, people tend to give information. Some people tend to ask information. It's kind of finding that balance. So what would you like to ask from the audience?
Yes. So I mentioned at the top of the episode, so this is the season finale of the first season of Virtual Coffee Talks, to be determined how and when and if we'll continue. So I would encourage everybody to watch prior episodes if you haven't watched them before. Send me feedback, send me your comments, send me your ideas for the show. And my goal was to create more visibility of the amazing talent that exists in Latin America, as well as demystifying a little bit the ecosystem. So if you're thinking about creating a startup or launching a company or getting into VC, I hope that Virtual Coffee Talks has helped in some way to inform you and to understand that we're all just people, we're all figuring it out. So don't be afraid to take the plunge. So yeah, give me feedback on whether or not we're hitting those objectives, and also what else would be helpful, or what else you would like to hear about. And I also invite everyone to, if they'd like to have office hours. I have open office hours every Friday. And that typically is for startups, but it can also be for anyone who's interested in getting some feedback on an idea, on what they're working on, or just to talk about life. So I'll include the link in the show notes, but I have open office hours every Friday, and I would invite you all to contact me.
Great. Well, it's been a pleasure guest hosting your podcast. It's an absolute pleasure. And thank you for giving me that opportunity.
Thanks, Erin. And also I wanted to throw it back to you. Do you have a shameless plug? Where can our audience find you, your work? Tell us a little bit more about where you are on the interwebs.
So my website is EKMH Innovators. And from there I contact fintech and tech professionals around the world and write content. I edit, and I've done a fair amount of ghostwriting, especially in the last, well, actually, definitely during the quarantine, but in the last few years. And I've interviewed you, and in my career, probably, oh gosh, maybe 300 fintech founders and C-level executives, and all that is available on my website, and you can follow me at Crowdfund Erin. Because initially, when I first started, I focused on crowdfunding. So I kept that handle on Twitter. Oh, nice. Yeah, and yeah, feel free to link in with me and follow.
Great. Well, again, Erin, thank you so much for guest hosting this episode of Virtual Coffee Talks. And to our listeners, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. And please leave me your comments and your feedback.
Thank you. Take care.